Um, ooh, that's it's a really hard question to say that because I think it depends on the person or like where you're. It's in because mainly like for me as being African, coming from like Congo and being like in because we don't really believe in that like mental illness in Africa kind of thing. So it's like I feel like as like someone from Africa, I look at mental illness as like this an experience or it's like a growth. So to me, it's like it's pretty much I don't really like it's when you label it as mental illness, that's when it pretty much becomes like a problem.
Yeah.
Because I look like when I go through like tough times in my life, I look at it as in, like it's an experience or I'm growing at that thing. So and I was trying to look for a solution where it's kind of different over here. Because when I came here, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know anything about mental issues coming from Africa.
Yeah.
So it was like a new thing. So that's why I think like it's pretty different um, culturally based because it's like wait it's in the Western society it's like if I don't have this it's like straight away get into that like zone but it's in Africa it's pretty hard to be in a mental like state like that because you live through every day with tough
With different
times
things,
with
yeah.
difficult like times and problems that you feel like you need to like solve so you don't really get to that point of like oh I'm depressed or I'm like in a mental
I think the context is really important. So I suppose definitely if you're in Africa, how you would address mental health and how we would look at it is very different, I suppose, as Africans living in the diaspora in a Western context. I don't really agree with what you say in terms of by defining mental health, you then perpetuate the problem. I actually think that's the reverse. So I think that people, I suppose, not necessarily acknowledging the existence of mental health issues is what causes them to exacerbate and become, I suppose, bigger than they need to be. I can definitely recognize that I suppose we all go through certain obstacles, and I think that's part of the issue is that we need to define what is someone going through a hard time, because yes, that is a normal part of life, and someone who is actually ill and struggling and does need to have some kind of either, medical or psycho attention to address the issue.
And
So-
I think to add to your point, Linda, it's a difficult thing to define, and that's the reason why we are in trouble a little bit, just because we just don't understand what it is. And so there are no real avenues to be able to try to find out what it is that we're trying to find out. And so we don't know what the problem is, so how are we going to solve it? Mental health is a foreign term to me. It's something that I don't understand even to this day. Like you're saying, how do you define mental health? Is it me going through a tough time? Am I meant to brave through it? How do you seek help? Where do you go for this help? So that's something everyone is trying to find their feet around, because I feel like within the past 5 or so years, it has become a problem just through awareness. Whereas, you can't tell me that there wasn't mental health 50 years ago, because it definitely was there. But I feel like these days, it's getting a lot more awareness. We're talking about it. So talking about it at this stage, it's helping. And so that's where I think we can make significant movement, just in terms of raising the awareness and in giving people the opportunity to be able to research the problem so that we can try to define it and then from there, find the solutions.
No, I think when it comes down to mental health, for those of us who are living in the diaspora, it's very different from those back home. Because when you look at it, back home, mental health is the least of our problems.
yeah
So we're not going to shine a light on something that's not really a big concern for us. There's poverty, there's illnesses, there's domestic violence. We've got all these other issues that a lot of people are concerned about, and mental health is the least of it. But for those of us who've grown up overseas, we've confronted and we've seen it happen to classmates, to teachers. So we've seen it face to face. Now it just comes down to...
What have you seen, Mamusu?
No, like let's say you see a teacher who went through a really bad divorce and then she ended up quitting her job because she was unable to deal with the issues of going back and forth in court with her ex-partner and stuff like that, to a point where the lady lost a significant amount of weight and everything else like that. And she self-diagnosed herself and said, yes, I am going through something and I am depressed. And later on, she went on to medication to help cope with what she was dealing with. So I think a lot of us have encountered it one way or another. It may not be personally, but we've seen people go through it. And just last year, we saw a couple of people within the African community who committed suicide due to some sort of depression or mental illness that they were facing. Now, I guess it comes down to how we identify individually, because what is mental health to me could be different to what it is to you. And my daily struggle could be mental health to you. Your daily struggle could be mental health to me. So it's very different. And as we are growing and we're going forward, and like you said, 50 years ago, mental health was around, but wasn't a big discussion because it was more of a stigma.
I probably wasn't around as well, so I probably...
No, I think it was. No, it was definitely around, because when you look at a lot of times you saw a lot of girls who got pregnant at a young age back in the 50s who got put into homes because they were seen as less than in society. So a lot of those women did face mental illnesses and they were going through shock therapy, etc., etc. So mental health has been around for a while. But back in the day within the Western society, it was a stigma, it was a problem, and it was hidden. And I guess we as the African community, we as the African people, it's still a stigma within our society. It's not something we've discussed publicly yet. It's something we're still working on. And as time goes on, depending on the individual and how you feel you want to go and address it, and if we're more vocal about the issues we're facing, then maybe we'll be able to have more open discussions and make it more known within our communities, and we'll stop losing people to mental illness.
And I think just like what you said before, it's like definitely going back to it's the experience, I think, mainly part to that, because it's like coming from back home as in Africa, I've experienced a lot of things. Like you've lived outside, you've had about the poverty thing you said. It's like when I come here, it's like someone, like what some of my friends can be like, oh, I'm mentally injured because my mom and dad got a divorce, I can't get a job. To me, it's like, well, it's a mindset kind of thing. So to me, it's like, if that came up, I would look for a way to solve it, because it's like I've had worse experience than that. Exactly. So as well, that's what I was, I think it's different levels of mindset, to be honest, to me, and it's a different experience. It might be as well, because a lot of people faces in growing up is we all go through problems relationships, all this other stuff. Some people let's say you're in a long-term relationship, as the first group said. It's because you break up and then it became a really big problem to her, but to me, I'm not heartless or anything. It wouldn't really affect me as much as it would affect someone else. From here, because I'm from Africa, I'm things doesn't work out. This is life. I gotta tap through it, and I've other things I need to focus on. I need to focus on education. I had to focus on all this kind of different stuff, whereas some of the people will be that's really a big deal to them. Well, to me, I'll be hey, it's just a small thing, because you've experienced a lot of different things, where someone else the divorce with what you said with your teacher and stuff. It's a lot of people go through divorces that, you don't, like you said, we don't really have time for that back at home, because there's so much things happening. You gotta focus on living through the day, you know. So it's
I think it's important, what you're saying with how different mental health is to a Western community as it is to
back home.
an African,
definitely.
And not even necessarily back home, but I suppose what children of immigrants, or a lot of us are first generation. Like you said, what we define our issues to be are very different. If you're a native Australian, we have I suppose a complex set of things to be addressing. We have issues of identity and assimilation, and trying to find our place in a society that's where we're minority. So that's a major thing. But I suppose another thing, and bring it back to what the original question was, is I guess because we are our generation is quite aware of mental health, but we talk to our parents who may not necessarily acknowledge those things, and there's that gap in our thinking between that generation and our generation. And I think that's probably why mental health issues are probably bigger in our community, because I suppose the people who we would ordinarily go to, whether it be your parent or your aunt or your uncle, can't necessarily address it on the same level that that we can't relate essentially. So that makes things a lot harder.
Big point there, because like, let's say talking to an elder within the community and you hear the struggles that they've gone through. Like, okay, I come from a country that was torn apart by civil war, and you see a lot of people who've survived the civil war. When you talk to them and then they explain what they've gone through, and then you explain your problem to them, it's like, what are you complaining? Like, you've got it better than I had it. And that's why I think, like, what you just said, Linda, about that's why maybe mental health is quite big in our community. And I'm not going to say it's big. I'm not going to say it's quite big in our community, but I'm going to say there's a gap between the older generation and the younger generation when it comes to communication. Because if I go to my dad and go and tell him that, I'm struggling with university or this and that, he'll tell me that I was married, I was on Centrelink, I was doing all this thing, and I was able to survive. You're not doing anything. You're just at uni. Why are you struggling with it?
To add to your point, Mamusu, I think. So yesterday I was sitting in the same room and guys were just saying, 10 years ago, if I had $100, I could go to the supermarket and get a basket full of stuff, right? These days, you go there and you only get one plastic bag. And the guy was saying, that's mental health to me.
Wow.
CPI increases, that's ruining my health, stuff like that, and also where to seek help. And so we have this issue within the community, within my community specifically, I think, of where you have an issue, you go speak to a pastor, and those people may not have the right experience to be able to guide someone through something so difficult that it's difficult to term medically or something. It's still challenged whether it's a medical condition or not.
I think it's just
it is a medical condition.
It's absolute.
No, but the thing is, when do you get to a point where you can say that I have mental illness? Because that's the thing, because I think a lot of us here have gone through different stages of our lives where we've been through the mud, where we feel like the devil was dragging us through hell. But then I didn't think in my head that I had mental illness. I just thought, like, this is a phase in my life I'm going to go through, and I'm just going to cross that bridge and move on. It's going to be an experience, and it's going to make me a better person at the end of this journey.
And I would believe that's the answer, is it's self-diagnosis. So you obviously weren't mentally ill because you were in a position to manage your, like, the state of, whereas someone who potentially would say I'm mentally ill, or I'm essentially mentally ill, would perhaps be in a position where it's beyond them and they can't even manage their mental state.
Another thing I think that's the issue is, to get back to the pastor thing I was talking about earlier, guys go there and they confine confidence within these individuals, right? And what they say is, we can pray over this, They say, you're going to be all right, we're going to pray. I'm not saying I oppose those beliefs. Personally, I believe in God, for the record.
Let's put it out there.
Yes, but it's a really difficult thing, because I'm not trying to say that, praying over depression, you're going to get over it or something. Maybe you can, right? I don't know. But
I think you can, because I'm not going to say that I am the most spiritual person here, because I think we all fall short of the glory of God as time goes on in our lives. But growing up in a Christian home and being baptized, and coming from a family where my grandfather was a pastor, my dad is a leader in the church, etc., etc. So I've been brought up in faith. So whenever I've ever faced any challenges in my life, I've gone directly to the Bible for it. And maybe it's because of my mental state, or because I put so much emphasis on God himself, that's why maybe I'm able to go to him and get some kind of relief. And I guess for somebody who doesn't have that religious place to go, then it's different for them. But I think depending on your state of mind and where you are and the way you've been raised, dealing with mental health or dealing with depression is very different. And me going to God is my first point. Then if God and I can fix it, then I'll bounce to like a church council or something like that.
But how do you know that God cannot,
what I think, if you view mental health as an illness, you would say, for example, if you're looking at cancer, as someone who's a believer, you would still go and get your chemo.
Yeah.
You would be praying and still get
But-
your chemo.
Exactly.
With mental health, you can still see the psychologist
And
or the
still pray.
psychiatrist and still be praying. So I think like that whole idea that it should be tackled as a medical issue is really important, because like, yeah, you know, God can heal your cancer, but God says go to the doctor, and that's perhaps God's way of healing your cancer. So yeah, I just think that
But I
that
mean,
whole
that-
medical
saying
issue.
that is the minute you like, because there's like pills and stuff, like medication for mental health, like these days, like to help you get out of that state. But in like, at what point do you know you're gonna get out of that state? Like, as in like the question I like saying, it's like you go to the doctor and stuff. Because I have friends that were facing hard times and they went to see a doctor and they put him on that type of medication, and it like then after a few months, a few weeks, it was just too much for them, so they stopped. It did make them happy for a bit, then they stopped, but then it just got worse.
Yeah, they declined.
Yeah,
really
it just
fast.
like they felt like they needed the people
Yeah,
to
they
be
become
happy.
yeah, they
it's
become
like
dependent
yeah,
on the
they become
medication.
dependent. So
Yeah.
I just think like it's a hard quite like questions and saying that as
Yeah.
well as like there's like as in like coming from Africa to here, I'm not gonna like say like I didn't know nothing about mental illness. That's why I think I have that mindset where it's like it's a problem to me. It's like if I have an experience that's really bad, I don't look at it as in it's like like it's a
My
like
mental health is-
my
my
mental
mental
health.
state
It's
is not
like
healthy,
I'm
yeah.
like bothersome. It's like a problem to me, and I have to face on and fix it and move past it. And I'll probably like it's like a growth thing to me, and I'll grow
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah.
Whereas in other people can look at it as like
This is the end.
yeah, it's just the end, and then
Yeah.
they get help, but that help, like, then they just get
Get dependent
stuck.
on something
They
else,
get
yeah.
dependent
Yeah.
on that type of help, whereas they need that help 24/7,
Constantly, so they
constantly.
can, yeah.
So I think it's like it's really
Yeah.
And one question I want to ask you guys is, okay, do you think the foundation of addressing mental health in the West would work for Africans? Or do you think there needs to be another way? Let's say we have someone in our different communities who is facing some mental issues. Do you think we need to create our own ways of addressing mental health and using the Western system that's already available? Because I think one thing we have to understand is that it also depends on who the person is.
yeah.
If the person was born here or the person is an immigrant from the continent.
Mm.
So all that kind of stuff, like what do you guys think would be the best approach in dealing with mental health from somebody from our community and the West?
I think where it starts is doing the research and finding out what it is that people are going through the difficulty of accessing services, right? So I know, for example, Anglican is doing something around the rollout of the National Disability Scheme and how that impacts that self-sufficiency, because the thing about this scheme is that individuals are meant to make the decisions in terms of how they want to treat their disability. And so a lot of the issues that people have addressed or have said are that people don't have the knowledge to be able to say, this is how I'm going to address this issue. And so they're doing a lot of research around that to try to find out how is it that they can help these people, because obviously they need a lot of help coming to a new country and understanding the language.
Yeah.
And to add to your point, I think a Western solution, whatever that is, I don't know what it is. I just think a solution is a solution if you have approaches that are targeted towards the population that you're trying to treat, right? And so, for example, if you're trying to treat Africans, you deal with the African Communities Council, some sort of body that has a wealth of knowledge to be able to provide the background of being able to address that
But
problem.
then I'm saying like it has to be customized.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah,
100%.
because like
that's
for me, the
consulting.
Western approach is like the whole counselor
Yeah.
thing, the whole going on medication. That's what I think the Western approach is. Well, let's say the African approach from my village and where I'm from would be having sitting by the campfire and discussing it with an elder. That would be the African approach, or just finding like different herbs that you will use on your skin, or just simple stuff like that. That would be the African approach. So my whole question is, do you think we have to customize these approaches to our people versus going directly to the one that's already available to us by the West?
I think there's value in science.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like with regards to cognitive behavioral therapy, so things like psychologists and stuff, I do think that there does need to be like recognition of the uniqueness of African mental health issues in comparison to other communities. Like every community has its set of problems, and that's probably where mental health issues stem from. But I do think that when you have someone who's literally prepared to die, there's nothing wrong in valuing what science can do for you, whether that be taking a pill. So yeah.
And I think to add to the context, so I came here when I was little, and so I can't provide the differences between what's in Africa and what's here. I mean, to me, when I was in Africa, it was the best time of my life. Right? I mean, I'm little, I play soccer every day. You know, it was the dream.
Yeah.
So in my view, mental health most definitely is an issue for African youth in the diaspora. Because of the uniqueness of where we've come from, a lot of people have come from very traumatic situations and find themselves here now having to deal with a new set of problems, which includes, assimilation, and then even just the things that even, Western millennials go through, finding jobs, employment, education. I suppose when you add all those things, it's a whole set of compounding things that we need to address, that we can't necessarily go to our elders for, or adults for, to seek advice, because sometimes we're not on the same page and it's hard to relate. Yeah, I
think just add on that, to be honest, I think it depends as well. It could on what age you came here, as from Africa to a Western country, because it's it depends. Because when I came here, I was 15, so I'd
your
seen,
mental state was very different.
I'd seen a lot of things. So my mental was really strong. I'm not going to be depressed about not finding a job. I'm not going to be depressed about all little things and stuff, ways. And so someone that was born here and came very young, it's a completely different view, from what he considered as a mental illness and what I would consider as really tough times. So something that he would consider mental illness, I would look at it as it's an experience. Because I was back when I was in Africa, things were really tough, living outside, living in a camp. So it's you tend to take in a lot of things, and it kind of builds. But I think, there is problems.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I lived in a camp as well.
Yeah.
I lived in a camp, and it's not as bad as it sounds, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was pretty chill. And I played soccer every day, like I said. It was the time of your life. I mean, you don't have much responsibility.
And especially as a child as well,
Yeah.
It's the best thing.
Yeah, but to just conclude the conversation, I think one thing we have to realize, mental health is a problem within our community because it's not a conversation we're having.
Yeah.
And all of us sitting here have had different experiences. Like what you've said, you came here when you were 15, and I came here when I was 9. Your mental health then was probably stronger than what mine was at that age. And so in saying that means each and every one of us here will experience something different and deal with it differently. So as discussing mental health or approaching mental health within our communities, we have to realize that each individual is different. Their experiences are different and their approaches will be different as well. It's not one thing that's going to work for all of us. So I guess our community leaders have to be aware of these things and approach each individual as an individual and not as a case study.